Okay, welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Max Collane, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Anthony Chaffee, who is a neurosurgical registrar, multi-decade carnivore, and strong advocate for animal-based eating as a real solution or a root cause solution to many of chronic diseases. Anthony, thanks for coming onto the podcast.
No, not a problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Cool. Well, can we please start with a bit of background on yourself and how you got to this point of being both a neurosurgical doctor and a carnivore?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in health and nutrition, just from wanting to study biology and become a doctor, as well as in my pursuits in athleticism. I always wanted to be able to fuel my body with exactly what it needed to perform the best that it could. And so I've just been studying nutrition since I was a teenager, really, and then more in depth later on in my academic career. I came onto a carnivore diet roughly 22 years ago. And I was always a very big meat eater. I always ate a lot of meat growing up. That was always what I preferred and felt best on. And when I was taking cancer biology in my undergraduate degree, we learned exactly how toxic plants were. This is something that we teach in biology and botany at every level, that plants use defense chemicals to stop animals from eating them, and they can be even life-threatening toxins such as hemlock and most other plants, actually. And we were looking at these from a cancer perspective, where there were dozens, if not over 100, known human carcinogens in all of the vegetables and plants and even fruits that we eat. And they were quite abundant. We've known since the 1980s, with the work of Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley, that the naturally occurring toxins in plants, vegetables, and so forth outweigh the pesticides that we spray on them by a factor of 10,000. And those were just the ones that he discovered at the time. We've discovered more since then. So presumably there are more than 10,000. And that the naturally occurring toxins, like say in mushrooms, were 500 times more likely to cause cancer on lab tests than the pesticides we were spraying on them. In that instance, ALAR, which is a pesticide that we're trying to ban in the late 1980s. So we were quite taken aback by this, and we actually went through, and that showed that Brussels sprouts alone had 136 known human carcinogens in them. Mushrooms had over 100, but even spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, anything that you've ever seen at the produce aisle in your store had dozens and dozens of carcinogens in them. And as we said, that they were quite abundant. So we were very, very shocked by this. I remember looking around frantically, like looking for the person that was in on the joke, and was just laughing like, "Oh, he always does this, and it always gets people." But no one was laughing, and it sort of dawned on all of us that, oh my God, this guy's serious. And I remember thinking to myself, like, well, but vegetables are still good for you, though, right? Even though they're highly carcinogenic as compared to pesticides. And he just looked at us and he just said, "Yeah, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you." So I said, right, that's it. I'll just stop eating plants. And I went to the store, and everything had plants in it, or was plants, or used plants. And so I just came across eggs and meat, and just said, okay, well, those don't come from plants, so I guess I'll just eat those. And I defaulted into just a caveman, carnivore, true paleo diet, truly what Paleolithic man was eating, which is just meat, fatty meat. And it felt amazing. My athletic performance just went through the roof. My energy and cognition became much, much, much better. And I just felt fantastic. And then I was playing rugby professionally in England 5 years later, and I just didn't have as the same access to meat. Things were, some of the meat was breaded. It was a bit more convenient to buy that instead of some of the other meats. And so, I sort of convinced myself, like, well, is it that big of a deal? It's just a bit of breading. Does that make that much of a difference? And it did make a lot of difference. I did notice I was getting aches and pains, and I was getting sore when I normally never got sore. I was getting these little niggling injuries that just weren't really going away. And it felt strange because I'd never felt like that. I always felt amazing all the time. And unless I had like a serious injury, I would not get a lot of little injuries and, or pulled muscles and things like that. And, it was, and the most significant thing was, is that was the break from me saying like, I'm not eating anything with plants in it, to then saying, oh, well, a little bit, is it that big of a deal? And then it sort of slipped off from there. But then 5 years ago came across information that showed that no, humans actually are carnivores as a species. That's just biologically the type of animal that we are. And that's what I was doing. I was living as a carnivore. I was eating to our biological design. And that's why I felt so great. And just like you have, signs at the zoo or at the park saying, don't feed the animals, it makes them sick. It's because that animals have a very species specific diet. They have to eat very specific things for optimal health or even good health. And we are eating outside of that. No animal on earth eats the variety of plants that we eat, even strict herbivores. They eat very specific plants. We are eating dozens, hundreds of different plants. So even if you could say that humans are designed to and supposed to be eating plants, we are certainly not designed to eat all the plants that we are right now. We're not supposed to either. And also the plants that we're eating now, they're all bioengineered either through selective breeding or just GMOs. So these things didn't even exist 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. So none of the plants we're eating now are biologically appropriate for us. And so that's just something that I came into, and I've just been doing a lot of research and digging into the literature and seeing exactly what we know and exactly what we can prove, and then applying it to my daily life and trying to educate others in it to help them better their lives as well.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating story and an amazing kind of anecdote of how you got started. I think that what you're saying and what you're proposing is, at the moment in our current society, so different and so beyond what most people are expecting and what most people believe to be true. The prevailing wisdom or the prevailing thought is that vegetables and fruit are essential for health. And when you ask a patient, what's your diet like? They'll say, it's a very good diet. I eat heaps of veggies. So where did we go wrong, or at what point did we stray from what you and I believe is an appropriate human diet of mostly an animal-based food, to where we are currently in society, where people are not only eating lots of vegetables, but almost exclusively, and they believe that is the healthiest thing for them?
Yeah, there's a few points that certainly made a lot of influence, and it's just been sort of a build-up since then. But from time immemorial, people have known that meat was essential for life, and this is where you got the most health. This is why different oppressive governments and empires would limit the supply of meat to a population that they're trying to oppress. And even in ancient Rome, when there started being uprisings, they would cut off the supply of meat, and that this was well known that this is a very vital, important source of nutrients, and that you really couldn't live without it. In the 1800s, the Seventh-day Adventists started noticing that people who ate a lot of meat were more, virile. Basically, they thought that this was lust and that people were more lustful and they wanted to fornicate and masturbate more. And this was obviously a sin and a deadly sin at that. And so they said, well, their duty to the world is to protect people from their own selves. And they found if you just limited meat or even just stopped eating meat, you would not have these lustful feelings. Really what you're doing is you're suppressing your hormones and you're becoming so unhealthy that your body is telling you you are not safe to procreate and you are not going to be able to survive and raise a family. It's not going to work very well. And that's really what you're getting. But they thought that this was good because this was holy in some regard. And so they started pushing that. That's where Kellogg's cereal comes from Dr. Kellogg, who's a Seventh-day Adventist and a very influential doctor. And I believe he's a congressman in America as well. And he pushed a lot of these policies forward, such as, male circumcision in America. This is why most guys in America are circumcised. This is a hallmark of Dr. Kellogg, and that was again because of these lustful feelings. It's difficult to masturbate or fornicate when you have a circumcised penis, and so that he convinced people that this was a medical urgency to circumcise young boys, when in fact it wasn't, and the motivation was actually something else. It was actually to stop people in future life from being able to masturbate as easily, which is obviously a huge invasion into the private lives of other people that you don't know and have no business knowing. It went on from there. There were different sorts of lobbying efforts from agricultural lobbies and pushing to try to get grains and plants more accepted and used and purchased. This is where the food pyramid comes from. So you need all this base of your pyramid is grains, and then vegetables, and then fruit, and maybe a little bit of meat if you have to, right? And that was just a lobbying effort. That was not based on any science whatsoever. That was purely marketing that was pushed forward by lobbyists in America, and that went around the world because quite often these recommendations can be quite influential from America around the world, and thought these other countries will take these up. So that was another step in the wrong direction. And then I think the nail in the coffin was the 1977 USDA report saying that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increased cholesterol. Stop eating fat, stop eating cholesterol, which is meat and eggs, basically, and you'll do better, and you'll live longer, and you won't get heart disease, which was a major killer at the time. The problem with that is that we then reduced our cholesterol intake by 30%, reduced red meat by 33%, and increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, and the heart disease rate has tripled. So that's obviously not doing what we wanted it to. And it also, obesity rates tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rates tripled, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even neurodevelopmental delays such as autism have all increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist before then, and now they're the only things we treat. And it's all these chronic diseases that, these non-communicable diseases that are the mainstay of modern medicine. And none of these things existed in the numbers that they did, certainly before the 20th century. And now they are 85% of the things that we treat, and certainly the vast majority of the money that we spend. Even just 9% of Americans are diabetic. Those 9% account for 75% of the Medicare budget in America, right? So that's a big cost. Now, if you consider the fact that 40% of Americans are pre-diabetic, that if they don't change their ways, they don't change their eating habits and their lifestyle, then ostensibly in 10 years or so, you could have 50% of the population diabetic. What's that going to do to the healthcare crisis and budget? It's going to be quite bad. So things have gotten a lot worse since those recommendations. Now, is it because of those recommendations? I think so. And I think there are other reasons to think that, but at least it changed after that point. But that was it. You're saying meat's bad, fat's bad, cholesterol is bad. Stop eating it. Eat these fruits and vegetables instead. Oh, here's this food pyramid. So there's a lot of lobbying. It's a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of misinformation, because that idea that cholesterol causes heart disease is false. And it's not only false, but it's fraudulent. The Journal of the American Medical Association published a paper from University of California, San Francisco Medical School, which is a top 10 research institution in the world. They published actual internal documents from the sugar companies back in the 60s, detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was not only safe, but like an empty calorie. Well, it's not really good for you, but it's not bad for you, was their argument. It sounds self-deprecating, but in fact, it's very aggressively covering up the fact that sugar causes serious harm. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA in 1965. And then he's the one who pushed and wrote and published that 1977 USDA declaration that cholesterol causes heart disease. Right.
Yeah.
And the world just changed dramatically after that. And we know that it was fraud. Ansel Keys as well. We know he was a paid shill of the sugar companies, and he falsified it and falsified data and cherry picked data to publish his 7 Nation study. He's a fraud, and they're all frauds. And so when you find out these things have been based on fraud, you have to throw them out. You have to throw out their conclusions, and you have to throw out all of the further studies and conclusions that were predicated on that false information.
Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic summary, and I'd also add that the rise of consumption of the polyunsaturated oils like canola, like vegetable oil, have, in my opinion, contributed massively to that rise in incidence of ischemic heart disease.
Yeah,
Mostly because
definitely.
they're in a massive oxidative stress load on the body, and they basically turn your lipoprotein particles, your LDL, into a highly oxidative, highly atherogenic particle. I really want to emphasize the point, and you did such a great job of describing how that knowledge or how the dietary guidelines have been basically abominated from an early point, and how much religious ideology is influenced what we're told to eat, but both in 1977, but subsequent to that. And I really think that what that looks like today is also, there's been a pile-on of artificial meats, of people advocating for the planet. There's been all these other entities that have joined the meat is bad, meat is harmful kind of bandwagon. And we're in a stage where people are following advice that is so far from what is physiologically appropriate and so far from what is gold standard in terms of what is good for health. I really want to emphasize the point. I want you to, explore the point of the chronic plant toxicity as a cause for human disease. And I really want you to lay out for the listener the different classes of plant toxins that we might be coming across, people might be coming across in their daily life. Can you give us a bit of
Yeah.
an idea?
Yeah, of course. I mean, well, that's the whole idea, right? I mean, is in first year biology, certainly at college level, but I remember learning in 7th grade that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive and procreate and flourish. And animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. And they can break those down safely. So the thing is, that animal eats that plant and it breaks that toxins down safely and gets rid of them. And then another animal can eat that animal, and that's sort of filtered out those toxins. And so that's the idea. So people say, it's like, well, the cow is eating the grass and that has toxins, so the toxins are just going to be in the meat. Well, that's an assumption, and of course that's wrong. I mean, that doesn't mean that the animal can just live with a whole bunch of toxins in its body. And some can, like the bone marrow of a koala is apparently very toxic because it sort of stores up a lot of the toxins from the eucalyptus. But I don't know if the meat is all that bad. I just don't think you don't eat the bone marrow. So that's the thing, that if your species hasn't evolved to eat a specific plant, that means that plant is bad for you. Maybe you have a bit of cross protection. Your liver can sort of break down certain things, and it can do amazing things, but it's limited in capacity. So there are a whole bunch of different kinds. If you think about it this way, if you get lost in the woods or out in the bush and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant, right? Most plants will make you very, very sick or even kill you. And in fact, most plants on Earth will kill you. Most plants on Earth will kill most animals on Earth, right? Because animals, even herbivores, are eating specific plants. Koalas eat one plant. Pandas eat one plant. Cows, horses, grazing animals, they eat grass. That's it. The leaves that a deer eats are different from the leaves that a giraffe eats. Those are different from the leaves that a gorilla eats. You mix those leaves around, they all get sick or die. And that's because they have their defenses for those chemicals and nothing else. And so a koala will not be able to eat. There are 340,000 plants in the world, right? But a koala will die from most of them, right? But most things will die from eucalyptus. So it's very, very specific. So there are a ton of different toxins. I mean, literally thousands, if not tens of thousands or more. And there are different varieties within these subcategories as well. I mean, think about like hemlock. That's famous poison. Killed Socrates. Water hemlock is the most poisonous plant in North America. Half of a leaf it's not even a big leaf, will kill an adult, right? Kids that sort of like chew on the stems or just sort of have them in their mouth like that have been killed, from doing that. It's very, very, very toxic. So there are direct toxins that will do direct damage to your body. So in the case of hemlock, it's actually a GABA receptor antagonist. So it blocks that GABA receptor in your brain, and you get intractable excitation, and you go into like seizures that you cannot control, you cannot stop because your GABA receptors are blocked. So even medication is not going to stop that. So you will die of seizures in a minute or two, invariably. It's very, very, very toxic, and even just a little bit less than that, you'll be getting massive seizures, and your life will be at risk. So there are some things that cause direct damage. There are other things that will be, like lectins. Lectins are a class of sort of a carbohydrate containing protein that can bind to other carbohydrates. So they can bind to the sort of carbohydrates being presented on the surface of your cells in your gut, but also in the rest of your body. So it can bind to these enterocytes and cause damage. And it can cause leaky gut, like weak germ agglutinin has been known to damage the tight junctions in between your enterocytes. And so now you have these gaps where lectins and other toxins, even bacteria, can now get into your circulation, and you can cause all sorts of problems from this. And you get these lectins that get into your body that normally would just pass right through if you didn't have leaky gut, which some lectins can cause, like weak germ agglutinin. So those lectins, there's tons of different lectins. There are lectins in meat as well, but those don't seem to cause a problem. They're ancient molecule. This is something that was thought to be developed for fighting off pathogens or insects, but there's obviously cross-reactivity with all forms of life. And so that gets into our system, and our body can attack those with antibodies. And then the genetically susceptible, there can be a cross-reaction through molecular mimicry. And now these antibodies that are in your system are now attacking parts of your body. This is thought to be one of the mechanisms for autoimmune diseases. But it can also do other things, like some lectins can actually bind to your insulin receptors more tightly than insulin itself. And so even if you're on like a ketogenic diet and your insulin's very low, you can actually get this insulin effect from the lectins and the binding to these insulin receptors, and sort of screw with your system that way and mess with your metabolism. There are a number of different sorts of things like tannins and phytic acid that forms phytates, and oxalates. These can all bind minerals and make in unbreakable bonds, and your body can't absorb these things. They usually get in your system, and they can bind up all these these minerals, or magnesium and calcium and things like that, and then your body can't use them even though they're in your system already. Phytic acid will bind to these things irreversibly. We can't break them down. Tannins will do the same. Tannins can also bind to proteins and make them unavailable. We can't break them down anymore. We can't absorb the amino acids. There are a lot of things that disrupt your digestion. Those are some of them. They'll actually physically bind to nutrients. So if you have a plant and it has these things in it, and most of them do, those nutrients that you get in, say, oh, this has this much magnesium, this much protein, this much of this. Well, that goes into your system, and they get bound up and aren't accessible to your body. Also, a lot of the times the nutrients in plants are just bound up already, and we don't have the machinery to break them down because we are not designed to eat these plants. These plants bind these nutrients up in such a way that makes it difficult for animals to get these nutrients, because they don't want the animal to profit from eating them. They don't want to have them have a benefit from eating them, so they want to sequester out their nutrients. A good example of this is corn. There was pellagra is a thiamine deficiency, and it's deadly. Kills you. So vitamin B1. This was killing people, just ravaging people for centuries. In Europe and America, and they finally figured it out that this was thiamine deficiency. And the thing was, this came from people eating a lot of corn, and normally people in Mesoamerica, they would go through a process called nixtamalization, which they would put like corn and lye and prepare it in a certain way, and they were doing fine on this stuff. You bring that to Europe, and they don't bring that technique with them. They were just eating the corn as it is, and people, it was cheap, it was easy to produce, and a lot of people who were very poor, this replaced basically everything else and in their food, and so they were eating this stuff and they were dying of pellagra. The funny thing is that corn actually has a ton of thiamine, but it's just bound up in such a way that we can't break it down because we are not designed to break it down. We are not designed to extract nutrients from corn. And so that's stuck there. And that's what that process of nixtamalization does, is it frees up that thiamine and other nutrients and gets rid of some of the toxins. So it makes it safer and it makes it more nutritious. So that's another thing. There are things called protease inhibitors, like especially like in soy and wheat, where they block protease from the pancreas and stop your body from being able to break down proteins. Most of the proteins in plants are unavailable anyway through the same mechanism. It's bound up in such a way that our bodies can't break it down into its constituent amino acids. A good example of this is gluten, right? So in wheat, 80% of the protein in wheat is gluten. We cannot break down gluten at all. We cannot get it broken down and used as protein at all. So right off the top, 80% of the protein in wheat is unavailable and inaccessible. The last 20%, I mean, you have to be fooling yourself if you think that that's 100% bioavailable. Of course it's not. But even if it were, it's maximum 20%. However, you have this protease inhibitor, which is now blocking your protease release from your pancreas. And now it can break down even less. But so if you have a sandwich, you have some bread with a steak, even though steak is going to be perfectly bioavailable, you'll be able to break down and absorb all of the protein, all of the fat in a very short time when just eaten alone. If you eat it with these other substances, it will block protease and you will actually not be able to absorb as much of the meat. So it actually disrupts your ability to get these nutrients. And that's beneficial to the plant, because if you're eating that plant, you're not going to get as much nutrients. You're going to waste away. You're not going to be as evolutionarily fit as the next guy who's not doing that. And so that member of the species is going to be able to procreate, and you're not going to be able to survive and procreate as well as that other person.
Yeah.
So there's tons of these things, tons and tons and tons.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize the point that the sources of nutrients, whether they be vitamins, minerals, they're not equal between plant foods and animal foods for the exact reason that you mentioned. And that is the fundamental reality of bioavailability. The presence of magnesium, of calcium, etc., within these plants doesn't mean anything if the body isn't able to access the actual nutrients that exist in there. The point about the processing of corn in Mesoamerica by traditional people is also very important. And that is a fundamental truth of traditional societies, which is anytime they consumed plants as food, not as medicine, as food, they had some method of processing. I believe that Peruvians used to put potatoes in a cold sack in a river and leave them there for a couple of weeks. There was fermentation, there was cooking, there was always peeling. There was some process that took this wild, raw plant full of a range of toxins and then pre-digested it before human consumption. And that kind of ancient wisdom or traditional wisdom, I mean, hasn't that been lost in modern society? Where, especially with something like a raw vegan movement, where people are just thinking that any plant in its natural state is going to be good for them. I really also liked how you broke down the different organ systems by which some of these toxins can have their harm. And one organ that's particularly sensitive, I believe, to plant toxins and toxins in general is the thyroid gland. Obviously, the thyroid gland is essential for coordinating a range of endocrine and metabolic processes in the body. So what type of plants are particularly dangerous to the thyroid, and what should we be looking out for in terms of thyroid toxicity in plant foods?
Well, there's a number, but I think as far as prevalence around the world and impact around the world, I would say like cyanide is probably up there. People don't think about this as they should, but there are 2,500 different plants that we know of that use these cyanogenic glycosides. So that's cyanide bound up with other molecules. So it's not just cyanide running around the plant, but when you bite into something, you crush it, it will release the cyanide from this molecular bond, and that will now release free cyanide into whatever's chewing that thing up. So it's if you swallow, like an almond, which will have cyanide in it, you're not going to necessarily release that cyanide. It's if you chew it up, and so that crushing will, because that's very indicative of something that's defending itself, right? So it's not going to be there unless it's being crushed and chewed and macerated. And so when you do chew these things, it releases the cyanide, and it can be quite harmful. One of the staple sources of nutrition in the third world and around the tropics in general are things called cassava. So there's bitter cassava and there's sweet cassava, and they have varying amounts of cyanide. So the bitter ones will have a lot more cyanide, and they will be deadly. They'll be life-threatening. So you can't actually eat bitter cassava without preparing it properly and processing it in a way that cyanide is less available. If you don't do that properly, you will die. Cassava it's the third most important source of calories in the tropics and in the third world. Okay, 500 million people rely on cassava every year. So 500 million people get cassava as their number one source of calories is cassava. 500 million people. That's a very, very, very important plant. It has cyanide, and even when you prepare it properly, it's still going to have some cyanide in it. It's not going to be able to get rid of all the cyanide, and even low-grade cyanide will cause thyroid damage and also cause neurological issues, especially in protein deplete individuals. So this is something that you see quite significantly in people that are getting less than sort of a minimum amount of protein. And we have these protein recommendations, something like 1.7 grams per kilo or something like that. That's a dead minimum. But people are like, oh, if I got that, that's okay. And people are falling short of that. I think around the world, it's like, the majority of people fall under that. That's a minimum. That's not like a maximum. It's not like a speed limit. You know what I mean? It's a speed minimum. Don't go below this.
Yeah.
And so most people are in that category. And so especially people in the third world and around the tropics, they're in that category. So they're going to be much more susceptible to the ravages of even low grade cyanide toxicities, and they will get serious damage to their thyroid. You get goiters and everything else. So it's and there's goitrogens as well. That's another good point. There are plants that just specifically attack the thyroid and make it non-functioning, and you get this big goiter. And then you'll get dysfunction. You'll get seriously hypothyroid. And that's obviously devastating. It can, first of all, it can kill you. Second of all, if you're pregnant during that and you don't have adequate, medical supplementation of thyroid hormone, your child will get congenital hypothyroidism, which is called cretinism, and that's a very, very serious, birth defect and congenital abnormality. They have very specific facial deformities and characteristics. They're stunted, they're short stature, and they're intellectually impaired as well, quite significantly. So that's very, very serious, and that's a preventable mistake, right? So you get, like in sports, you talk about these unforced errors, right? That's an unforced error. It's just something that you have that in our society, we certainly have control over what we eat. In the third world, you have to eat whatever you have to eat because you need to survive. But this is an unforced error here in the West, where we have an abundance of food and options of food. And so doing that to your child and having them develop something such as cretinism, or, somewhere along the line of that, obviously you don't have to have full blown cretinism to be seriously affected and
Yeah.
permanently affected for your development.
Yeah.
So
No,
I think that's something that's important.
yeah, I totally. And I think that to bring that back, or to bring that relevant to people, it's not only about cassavas and the cyanide containing
Mm.
vegetables. You can find goitrogens in commonly consumed cruciferous vegetables that people are consuming daily. As you said, things like Brussels sprouts, broccoli, broccolini. These compounds contain these plants contain compounds that will inhibit your body's ability to use iodine at the level of the thyroid. Again, not many people realize that, and yes, processing may inactivate some degree of those toxins, but as you said, when it comes to something like pregnancy and the risk of having such a disrupted endocrine function in terms of the thyroid gland during pregnancy, it just doesn't seem like it's worth the risk. You got to like your Brussels sprouts a fair bit to want to risk that. And
Yeah.
the I want you to quickly make a point, because I agree with you about the minimum about protein intake. What do you think is not only is appropriate for men and women to have in terms of a protein requirement to thrive, not just to survive, to thrive?
Um, well, I mean that as a minimum, obviously, I don't have a good answer as this is exactly what you need to shoot for. When eating a carnivore diet, when you're eating a biologically appropriate meat-based diet, you can just eat intuitively and you can just listen to your body's responses. And if something is, if meat is tasting good, then that's your body giving you a positive feedback saying, hey, we want these nutrients. And so lean meat is like, wow, that tastes amazing. And eventually lean meat just kind of like, it's not that pleasant anymore. You add some fat to it, like, wow, that's amazing. Okay, so your body wants those nutrients as well. And when you're eating like a fatty piece of meat, it has everything, and it just all works together. And so when you're eating intuitively and you're just eating the amount of meat that your body's asking you for, and you eat to the point that it just doesn't really, it isn't really tasting interesting, and it doesn't have to taste bad, but it will taste bad eventually if you keep forcing yourself. But just to the point where you're just kind of not like, I'm not interested in it anymore, and you naturally want to stop, you'll find that you get hundreds of grams of protein. And so, whatever our minimum is, you will more than exceed it if you're going on a carnivore diet. And I think that really what our minimum is exactly what our bodies want it to be. It's you need to get enough protein. You also need to get enough fat. And I think that if you're eating intuitively and you're not eating carbs, you're not eating lectins, you're not doing these things to mess with your insulin, you're not blocking leptin, and you're not disrupting your body's normal hunger signals, that you can actually listen to your natural instincts and at your senses that everything else, every other animal is able to trust. Obviously things like sugar is a bit of an outlier, but sugar is a drug. Sugar is addictive. It gives a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. And so this is a drug, and we recognize this as something safe as well. It's something that's very sweet. So fructose is very, very sweet. It's much more sweet than the other carbohydrates, the other
Yeah,
sugars. And it's thought to be that evolutionarily this was because we recognize those as at least moderately safe, right? At least for the time being, it's safe. It's not acutely poison. It's not going to kill us on the spot. We can
yeah,
get a quick hit of energy from this, and we can go off and get our normal food. We can survive, and that's why we've sort of recognized fructose as sweeter, just because it does provide us with energy. It does give us a quick hit of nutrients. But also things containing fructose are much, much less toxic. They're not
yeah.
completely untoxic because they don't have any defense chemicals. Like citrus, for example, a lot of sugar and a lot of citrus, but they also have a lot of like furanocoumarins and things like that, which will make you very light sensitive. They'll when UV light hits them, they'll bind to your proteins and DNA and irreversibly
Mm,
damage them. You get horrible
mm,
burns. People get second degree burns from just squeezing limes in the sun,
yeah,
and that's the furanocoumarins are what are in grapefruit that make it so you can't eat grapefruit if you're taking certain medications, because these furanocoumarins are toxic and your liver's trying to clear them out of your system.
yeah,
the cytochrome P450 enzymes that go after the thioanacoumarins in grapefruit are also the same that metabolize certain medications. And so, if you're going to get either the medications isn't going to be metabolized, so it's not going to work as well, or it's going to build up and you're going to get a toxic level of it. So it's that's what's going on. So it's not that anything with fructose is safe, that has no toxins whatsoever. It's just that they're less dangerous. They're safer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying, but otherwise you can sort of trust your taste for good and bad. If something's bitter, something tastes bad, you just stay away from it. There's something in there that's bad. Grapefruit, horribly bitter. We bred it to, like we red things, bred it to have more sweet things, but it is normally bitter as hell. And that's your brain telling you like, hey, don't eat this. This is bad. And we cook things and change things and add oil and butter and seasonings to try to cover up that horrible taste. And, and we're not doing ourselves any favors by doing that. But when you're eating a natural diet, when you're eating a species specific appropriate diet, which is what meat is, which is what fatty meat is in particular, then you can listen to that. When it tastes good, you're getting a positive feedback, keep eating this, right? And then you'll get to a point where it's just like, it's just not really tasting good anymore. You can stop. Some people are used to eating massive portions. And so they're like force feeding. They're like, oh, I hate this. I have to force feed myself. It takes 2 hours to finish a meal. It's like, well, actually you were done 2 hours ago. That's when you were actually finished. It's just, you were just used to use it. Oh, I have to clear my plate. You don't have to clear your plate. You just need to eat until your body tells you to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to emphasize the point about protein intake, and everyone's going to have a slightly different protein demand. Obviously, Anthony, if you has just been to the gym and has played a game of rugby, his protein intake and his degree of lean muscle mass is going to necessitate more protein. But the key point is that I think we're all collectively as a society under eating protein, and that includes elderly people, that includes postmenopausal women, that includes growing children, that includes women of childbearing age, and that includes men, because it's so necessary to build the structure of our body. We need the bioavailable amino acids in animal meat to build the structure of our body. And again, there is an inferior source of plants, an inferior ability to use plant-derived amino acids to build that structure of our body. So, it's there is a minimum, and I would encourage everyone to explore and not restrict themselves when it comes to eating animal protein. And as Anthony said, to eat what feels good. This idea of intuitive eating is something, again, which I really encourage, and really people reconnecting with their body. What does my body feel like? And your body will tell you. I think the body has an amazing way of communicating with people. Sometimes it makes people eat ice. Sometimes it makes people eat dirt if it needs them to eat more iron. So people might become to in a dream. They might have an imagination of imagine eating meat. I mean, if you tune out of everything else that's going on and really intuitively ask yourself the question, what does my body need? Your body will tell you if you're willing to receive that message. So again, Anthony, that's a really great point, and something that I really encourage the listeners to do. The one point I also want to make, and I want you to I guess answer this, which is a rebuttal from a lot of people, which would be, there is a hormetic benefit from eating plants, which is a benefit to my health by a low level exposure to a harmful substance. They might also say there's a medicinal use to these plants. So what would you do to those in terms of those two major, I guess, rebuttals to your position?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say too, you're talking about that coming to you in a dream and what you want to eat. I've heard the funny statistics that like 90% of vegans and vegetarians eat meat when they're drunk. So it's just like they're just drunk. They're like, you know what, give it to me.
Yeah, there you go. Like, there you go.
They're disinhibited and their bodies just sound like, look, you need to do this.
Yeah,
and so,
actually, and there was a functional MRI study done, I believe. Take that for what you will. There's flaws in the methodology of functional MRI, but it was involved showing a group of vegetarians and meat eaters plates of animal food, plates of meat, and they looked at the areas of the brain that were being activated, and the same deep brain structures, evolutionary preserved brain structures, were being lit up in both groups of vegetarians and non-vegetarians, despite what their cortex, their neocortex, their brain was telling them. So yeah, keep going.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah. So on the topic of hormesis and medicine, yeah, I mean, that's look, it's I don't think it's a great argument, but it's certainly something that should be addressed. Because it's an argument. Say, hey, look, can't some things be better for you? I mean, I guess but they say it's like, well, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. I'm like, I don't know. Now, cutting off all four of your limbs may make you a stronger person and more resilient in nature, but it's not going to actually help you win a track meet. So this idea of hormesis, just anything damaging you is also going to be beneficial for you. I mean, people die from things. That's not hormetic, right? So I think that I just sort of, just challenge that on its face. But the idea of hormesis, I mean, this was an example too, like alcohol. Is that hormetic? Well, it does have a hormetic effect. It builds up. You build up a tolerance, and your liver will start producing more of the enzyme to break down that alcohol. Okay. But okay, so that's hormetic in that sense, but does that provide an overall benefit to your life to build up your resistance and your tolerance to alcohol? Probably not. And it's not that you're drinking alcohol and you have no effect from alcohol. You still get an effect from alcohol. It's still damaging your body. It's just at a lower extent, and your body is trying to fight this stuff off. So that's hormesis, but is that giving you an overall survival advantage? Not really.
That's a great point. And the question is, are we optimizing in the right direction? Yeah, we might be developing, greater hepatic ability to clear some of these toxins, but is that actually benefiting the organism? Is that helping us thrive or live a more healthy life? I don't think so. So that's a great point.
Well, that's exactly right. And say, okay, so and let's look at this. And they say this like, okay, well, if you take something, maybe this has a hormetic effect. Well, maybe it does, but have you proved it? Have you shown it? This is just a random supposition that people throw out there to say, oh, well, you'll get hormesis. Will you? Like, where's your evidence for that? There's exactly zero. But let's say something is hormetic, and let's say that something is not like alcohol, but it actually gives you an overall benefit. It's truly hormetic and puts you in the right direction. I don't know of any examples of that. I don't think they know of any examples of that, but let's say there's one, right? I'm sure there's one out there in some circumstances. Let's say there is. Okay, this is not the only thing that exists in that plant. There's going to be thousands of other things in there as well. Okay, so that one thing is hormetic. Are all the other things hormetic? And do they give an overall advantage to you? Or if they are hormetic, are they hormetic at the exact dose as this one molecule being hormetic? And also, how do you know? We don't have any studies showing that this dose of X is hormetic to this extent. And if you do, how are you going to tell how much of that is in a leaf? How many leaves do you need to get this exact dose of hormesis? This is the difference between, allopathic medicine and naturopathy, right? Naturopathy will just say, well, we say, look, there's digitalis, get it from foxglove, but you need these exact dose and measured in micrograms. And between this window, this narrow therapeutic window, that it's not doing nothing, but it's not killing you also. So you have to meet this very, very small, narrow margin. And the naturopaths would say, no, you want it from the plant itself, right? And there's something else in there that helps with it. Okay, well, what else is in it that's helping? Do you know? Be a scientist, isolate it and show what it is, and get it in the exact doses that you want. But also, how much of what conditions were it grown in? What soil was it grown in? Does it need to be picked in adolescence or maturity? Does it need to be dried? Does it need to be fresh? How long can it be dried? How long can it be stored? And how do you know that you're getting this exact dose? So you cannot do that with plants. And first of all, they don't know. That is a blind supposition. We've gone down every single path, showing how toxic these things are, showing how problematic these things are, showing that they're not bioavailable, showing that meat's not a problem, that fat's not a problem. This is sort of their last their last plank in a sinking ship that they're grasping on desperately for, showing like, hey, look, these things are not only not necessary, not optimal, but they're also toxic. They also cause harm. And they go, hormesis, This is obviously hormetic. This gives advantage. There's no evidence for that. None, zero, zilch. And again, if there were, you'd still have to balance it out with all the other things, with all the thousands of other chemicals that are in there. They're certainly not hormetic.
Yeah.
And then trying to figure out the exact dose of hormesis. I mean, this is what medicine is. This is what supplements are. You have this one thing, you isolate it out and say, here it is in a pill. If you take that and you take it in a plant, you're taking all the other things with it and you don't know what dose you're getting.
Yeah.
The same thing applies to medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, if you have a bacterial infection, you don't lick an agar plate, growing with growing with fungus. You have a purified penicillin.
Yeah, that's it. And the same thing, and if you have heart failure, you don't go around chewing, finding foxglove on the side of the road and just chewing that, because you have no idea the dose that you're getting, and you're also getting in a whole bunch of other things as well. And and on the topic of medicine. So I mean, medicine and hormesis go hand in hand, because in certain circumstances, yes, some of these things will be hormetic, right? Like the digitalis, right? When you have heart failure, this poison has a hormetic effect. It has a benefit to you in that circumstance. But when you don't have heart failure, it causes harm, right? And so an antibiotic, when you have a specific infection, which that antibiotic can facilitate the clearing of, that antibiotic will give a hormetic effect, right?
Yeah.
But when you're not sick and you don't have that infection, that antibiotic will only cause harm. It will only have the unwanted effects that come with it. And that's true of any other medication. People talk about, mushrooms and, oh gosh, it was like Dr. Berg actually took a clip from my Plants Are Trying to Kill You talk at Low Carb Down Under, and was talking about how, well, actually, if you want to, these things are trying to kill you, but really they're only trying to kill cancer cells, and broccoli is only trying to kill cancer cells. And so he talks about this one molecule that's in broccoli and how this is really beneficial when treating cancer. And it's just like, okay, well, what about the other 150,000 other chemicals in broccoli? What do those do for you? Are those all good? Are those all providing benefit? Or even the ones that are, all the dozens that are carcinogenic? And also, this is good if you have cancer, but do you have cancer? Then why are you taking chemo? Right?
Yeah.
Chemo might be hormetic when you have, leukemia, but you shouldn't just take it, for the hell of it. There was a Dr. Furman who did the Gomes diet. That was like, was it Eat to Live, I think was his book. And he's just basically raw food vegan is what he pushes. And he says that there's anti-VEGF in mushrooms. And my brother read this book. He's like, oh, you got to read this. Oh, you got to eat mushrooms. You got anti-VEGF. It's good. It helps, fight off cancers. And my initial response was just like, that makes no sense. Mushrooms themselves have over 100 carcinogens. I learned that in cancer biology. And so also, I don't have cancer. So why am I taking something that helps me fight cancer? I'm taking something that can cause cancer in order to help fight the cancer that I don't have. That's so backwards. So, yes.
And for the listener, sorry to interrupt, the VEGF is anti-vascular endothelial growth factor, which is a molecular target for a range of anti-cancer therapies. And your point is well taken, which is there is a dynamic equation in terms of risk versus benefit. And when we're healthy, the benefit of some of these substances just simply doesn't exist. Whereas if you're septic, floridly, and your blood pressure is, about to tank you and you're about to die, then of course we're going to give you high dose, broad spectrum intravenous antibiotics, and the potential harm that those antibiotics are doing to your system is grossly and vastly outweighed by the benefit, which is killing the bacteria.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Go on. I interrupted you. You were talking about the harms of mushroom, and just explain a bit more about that.
No, but that was it. Basically, it's the same idea. These things are matter on the circumstances, and so they can have this beneficial effect, but only in certain circumstances, and also they will come with problems, right? So you're eating mushrooms to try to cure your cancer. I think that's probably not the best way of going about it, because there are other things in mushrooms that are going to cause harm and going to sort of screw your body up. I mean, the mycotoxins in mushrooms are absolutely devastating. Fungi have in general some of the most deadly toxins around. I mean, you know this. Like one of the examples I use is, there's about 10,000 different varieties of mushroom in the world, right? How many of those don't kill you on the spot or give you a religious experience, right? There aren't many. So they're going to have
Yeah.
these very, very severe acute phase reactions that are either going to kill you or make you hallucinate and get extremely unwell. And a lot of these, like the ayahuasca, peyote sort of things, these medicine men would drink them. They have these florid hallucinations and they'd just be vomiting for hours and hours and hours. And people like that go on these retreats that do these ayahuasca vision quest sort of things. I was talking to people who have done these things. They're supposed to do 3 nights in a row. And the first night they vomited for 12 hours straight to the point they blew blood vessels in both eyes and these big red demon eyes. And they're like, I'm not doing that again. They're like, no, it's really important to then go to the next. It was like, absolutely not. I'm walking. And so these things are actually toxic.
Mm.
And so the idea that you can use things medicinally, yeah, of course you can. You can chew. People have been chewing willow bark for thousands of years in order to help with pain,
Mm.
and or opium cakes. Like Alexander the Great had little opium cakes that he
Yeah.
gave his men. They could march longer, fight longer, and be more sort of sustained and satisfied. These things have uses, but they are very specific, and they aren't. And the use of them isn't proper nutrition, and that's what people should understand.
Yeah. And that's a good, I guess, summary, which is there are certain situations where plant derived substances, bark, whatever, leaves, can be used in a medicinal way in a certain dose in a person who is potentially to benefit. But they're not offering nutrition in the sense of nourishing the structure and the function of the human organism. So as long as and look, I'm happy to accept and I obviously agree that there's a place for using those medicinal plants at some point in the proper context. But again, it's not to substitute, or they're not superior sources of human nutrition compared to animal derived foods. And I guess we're talking about cancer and we're talking about autoimmunity. And I think these are really key topics because both of them involve derangement in our body's immune system function. Um, Both of them have seen a massive rise in incidence since maybe 1900 or when basically whenever we've been starting to take note. Both of them were unheard of when you read about anthropological expeditions to certain Inuit communities or traditional peoples. They didn't have cancer or autoimmunity, we touched on it a little bit before, but certain plants are notorious in provoking an immune response, which later becomes autoimmunity or later becomes cancer. And if we reverse the paradigm and we say, okay, let's remove these substances, let's remove plants completely from the diet. I mean, Anthony, you tell us what happens to patients who have autoimmunity and cancer when they completely remove plants from their diet.
Well, certainly autoimmunity, they improve dramatically and right away. I mean, there have been tens of thousands of people around the world that have been using an extreme elimination diet, eliminating out. I mean, extreme in the sense that they're eliminating out a lot of things that we eat normally, not extreme in the sense that this is bad. But just eliminating out as many things as they can besides our core, primary nutrient source, which is just meat. And a lot of these things are going away. We've actually been treating autoimmune issues since the 1800s. This is in the medical literature. There have been multiple books written about this, treating Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis. Since the 1800s, Dr. J.H. Salisbury first wrote about it. Well, more people really, but he wrote a whole book about called the relation of alimentation and disease. So the relationship between what we eat and the diseases we get. And he found that people that were eating plants were simply getting diseases other people weren't. And this was long before processed sugar. And he found that he could cure these people by putting them on a pure red meat and water diet, and you did. And so there's 100 years before any reasonable treatments were available for rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, or ulcerative colitis, and they would just go away. And this isn't actually just off way back when, and God knows how accurate it was. There was a book written as recently as 1975 by a gastroenterologist named Dr. Voigtland. It's a very weird spelling, but it's called The Stone Age Diet. And he just writes like, look, humans are carnivores. This is the evidence for it. And we get sick if we eat outside of our natural diet. And he basically made the argument. He says, if you don't eat plants, my profession doesn't need to exist as a gastroenterologist. It's like Crohn's goes away, ulcerative colitis goes away, IBS goes away. Obviously celiac, that never even starts. But then 1977 kicks around and they say, no, meat's bad for you, stop eating it. And it just overshadowed literally 100 years of medical literature and scientific endeavor. And it's a bit ridiculous. But there have been since then, there have been a number of studies like in Crohn's and ulcerative colitis showing that even just a ketogenic diet or again, an elimination diet, you're eliminating out these plants and carbs and sugar, you stop having these autoimmune issues, right? So what does that mean? It means that whatever you've cut out is what's causing the disease, right? I mean, that's pretty straightforward. There's a relationship there where you add this in, you get the problem, you take it away, the problem goes away. That's a
Bradford
very, very
Bradford
clear.
Hill criteria, causation.
Yeah, that's it. And it shows a clear exposure relationship. This is not a genetic disorder that's going to be there no matter what. This is an exposure. You are exposed to something, you have that exposure experience, like lead poisoning. You're exposed to lead, you get lead poisoning. This is a very, very clear one-to-one relationship. So there's studies looking at an elemental diet, and this is something that they should just be using in general for a lot of things, but it especially for like kids with epilepsy. This is only we've been using a ketogenic diet, fasting for hundreds of years, not thousands of years. That was the only thing that would help with epilepsy. And then like 100 some years ago, they figured out that you could go on a ketogenic diet and have the same effect. And so now you have these these elemental diets. It's ultra processed. It's literally a protein shake sort of thing with fat and nutrients. It just has the constituent nutrients that you need for life and nothing else, right? So that's a real elimination diet. And so people would take these things, and if you get the ones with for the epileptic, so it has no carbohydrates, so it's a ketogenic one, they have very, very good results. I've spoken to many people with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis that they'll eat whatever, and then they'll have all these flare-ups, all these problems, and then they'll go on this elemental diet, and it just goes away. So there was a study showing that with an elemental diet, that this was more efficacious to get people out of flare-ups of Crohn's than prednisolone, right? So
Really?
it's better than steroids. That's crazy. Steroids work very well and very fast, and they obviously have a lot of side effects as well. This worked better than steroids. Okay, just eliminating out the cause basically of the Crohn's worked better than the steroids, which makes sense. It's better to get rid of the lead from your pipes than just use a chelating agent ongoing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe use both in the short term. But there's also studies with looking at it's called a fasting mimicking diet, because obviously fasting helps really well, because again, you stop exposing yourself to the cause of your harm. And so they say, well, does a fasting mimicking diet help as well? And I found, well, yeah, it actually does. They had a randomized control trial looking at people using a fasting mimicking diet, which is just another term for a ketogenic diet that doesn't have the stigma, and so eliminating out carbs, eliminating out fiber, and in the people in that group stayed in remission from Crohn's an average of 51 weeks, right? Pretty good. No medications, right? Compared to the control group that was still eating carbs, still eating fiber, they stayed in remission on average 0 weeks. which is not a lot of weeks, and
Yeah.
certainly not going to be 51. And so we already know, we have in the current scientific literature, quite good evidence that this is being caused and perpetuated by the food that we eat, and we can benefit from eliminating out that food very clearly. And again, 150 years of scientific literature before that, showing the exact same thing.
Yeah. And I really want to make the point that the reason why the elimination diet is so effective is because you are healing that gut barrier and you're removing a range of food antigens that and phytochemicals and all kinds of other chemicals that are compromising the integrity of that gut barrier lining. And I know the theme of the discussion so far has been the effect of the plant compounds on the gut lining. But I really want to emphasize the point that other factors, chemicals like glyphosate in processed food, other kinds of food contaminations, refined polyunsaturated vegetable oils, refined sugar, all these other chemicals are just going to augment and the harmful effect that something like wheat germ agglutinin is having on our epithelial barrier down in the gut. So anything that allows the gut to heal properly by simply absence of its noxious stimulus is going to help the gut heal, and by extension remove that constant low level of exposure on the immune system, which leads to autoimmunity. And as Anthony mentioned, I mean, it makes sense that the first of the gut-based autoimmune conditions like Crohn's disease, like ulcerative colitis, show an amazing result to a complete elimination diet. But I really want to make the point that that's not only the only conditions that respond well. Anyone who's heard of Michaela Peterson, who's the daughter of Jordan Peterson, she had a very insidious form of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis with multiple joint replacements before the age of 20. Again, her symptoms were controlled by eliminating all kinds of foods except for animal meat, and that got healed, and the immune system was not stimulated anymore. So autoimmune thyroiditis, gut inflammatory bowel disease, all kinds of, and there's also evidence that early type 1 diabetics can prolong the honeymoon phase of their preserve their islet cells by going immediately on a elimination diet. So it's a very, very simplistic in its universal in its appropriateness to treat autoimmunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think you nailed it right there. Like there are so many different factors that can go into this, but the beauty of it is you just eliminate out all these things and you just get rid of them completely, and they're just not in your system, and your body can heal, your gut lining can heal, you'll fix those tight junctions, and your body your enterocytes will now seal themselves off, and now things aren't getting into your body that shouldn't be in your body. With Michaela Peterson, she had a dramatic difference in her health and well-being. She came off all of her medications and DMARDs. She's also helped her psychiatric issues. That's something else that people are now learning a lot more about with the work of Dr. Chris Palmer from Harvard. He's a Harvard psychiatrist. Just wrote a book called Brain Energy, and I'll actually be having him on my podcast at some point in the next few weeks, which would be great. And to talk about this, but he's found, and this has been in the literature, if you go back, it's not talked about all that time, but if you look for it, you can just do like a PubMed search or Google Scholar or whatever, and look for mitochondria, metabolic dysfunction, and psychiatric issues. There are dozens of studies going back decades looking at proposing and saying, hey, we are noticing a problem in the mitochondria, problem with the molecular respiration and metabolism at the cellular level in people with schizophrenia, major depression, OCD, and all the rest. And it's consistent. It's consistent across the board, and so that's something that's already been proposed, that these sorts of psychiatric issues are metabolic in nature and in the genetically susceptible, obviously, and so Palmer has done actual studies with hundreds and hundreds of patients, and he's finding that you can actually reverse the symptoms and actually mechanisms, really, of schizophrenia and OCD and bipolar and major depression and anxiety, and you can give people back their lives. As he makes the point that with traditional standard of care with these psychiatric issues, all of them, not, even just like, just a bit of minor depression or anxiety every now and then, all of them, only about 10% actually get resolved with current standard of care. Others can be benefited, but not resolved. And a ton of them don't really get any benefit at all. So we don't really have very good treatments at the moment. Our standard of care is quite poor because they're not addressing the root cause of the problem. This, I think, is a problem with medicine in general.
Exactly.
We are putting band-aids on things.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, go on.
Sorry.
I was just going to say psychiatry epitomizes the idea of chronic disease management. It's possibly the most hopeless and the most egregious of chronic disease management in terms of the use of pharmaceutical drugs in the absence of more effective lifestyle therapy.
Yeah. And that's the thing, we haven't really necessarily known that lifestyle played such an important role, but more and more people are coming around to this. More and more people are coming to a carnivore diet or at least an elimination diet, ketogenic diet for their psychiatric issues. Jordan Peterson is a perfect example of that. He had major depression and anxiety issues, and they were helped by eliminating out carbs and sugar, nightshades, and just eating sort of lettuce, salads, and steaks. But he was still having anxiety issues. He was still having other problems. And so he found that just eliminating out the salads and just going to a pure, strict meat and water diet, he was able to get rid of most of his anxiety. And, he was quite shocked. He was like, salad was doing this to me. And he was quite, appalled by that. And there's no carbs in that, so you're not you're already in ketosis, you're already in a ketogenic state. But there's obviously something else in these defense chemicals that are screwing with your brain chemistry and making it so that you have these disordered thoughts and feelings. And Dr. Palmer's really shown that with hard science and actual studies, this is not anecdotal. There's not just like, wow, this person had this major health benefit and has got off all his medications and actually is alive for the first time in his life, really. But it could have just been a coincidence. It's just anecdotal. It's not anecdotal anymore. We have studies with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people now, doing this as an interventional studies showing the benefits as compared to the standard of care. Okay, so this is a much better treatment than standard of care anyway, and is probably doing so by actually addressing the underlying cause, which is a metabolic issue, which is so many other diseases such as cancer, such as autoimmune and all these other things, seeming to be at least in part metabolic in nature.
Yeah, and that is so important. And the reason why it's so important is that we're flipping this paradigm that it's your genetics is your destiny. And so many times I'll be talking about lifestyle to patients, and the degree to which they speak with almost a resigned attitude. Oh, well, my parents had that, or my father had this. And it's almost an inevitability of resignation that they're doomed to have whatever condition that their forefathers had. By what Anthony has just talked about, which is this increasing recognition that mitochondrial dysfunction is at the basis, the root cause of so many of diseases. And I mean, it's huge because the implication is that if you get the lifestyle levers right, of which diet is a key one, and of which circadian rhythm, I know that's not a topic of this discussion, is another important one. If we get these levers right and we tune the knobs properly and we get rid of all the processed foods, and in many cases really cut down on our plant, on our processed plant foods and plants in general, these diseases go away. And whole reams of medical specialties, the gastroenterologists, the psychiatrists, I mean, their jobs aren't necessary anymore because the organism, the body, has healed itself. And because you've simply facilitated its optimal thriving and really given it what it's needed. So I'll very much look forward to that conversation because I feel like we're on the cusp of mainstream understanding that it's not the genetic code, the somatic mutations, it's the mitochondria. And if we do things that treat our mitochondria right, we're going to get optimal health.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's already been studies looking at mitochondrial health and diet as well, like a ketogenic diet. If you go on a ketogenic diet, your mitochondria actually are 4 times more efficient
Mm.
and they're 4 times as numerous. So that you actually get about almost a 16-fold increase in your metabolic capacity at the cellular level. And so it's that makes a huge difference. It's going to make a
Yeah.
massive, massive difference in your
Yeah.
life and your health.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think you're right. Things have been overshadowed. As someone said, there was Otto Warburg did a lot of research into cancers in particular, but mitochondria in general.
Yeah.
And he was a Nobel Prize winner in medicine, I think, in 1931. And he did decades and decades of research after that. That was quite amazing. And he actually argued, there's a 1951 paper where he talks about the origin of cancer, and he talks about this is a mitochondrial metabolic disease.
Yeah.
These cancer cells need 400 times the amount of glucose to run properly because their mitochondria are so damaged they can't go through oxidative phosphorylation like normal cells can.
Mm.
And this simple fact ends up having a lot of knockdown downstream effects that end up in metastatic cancer,
Yeah.
or the ability to have metastatic cancer.
Yeah.
So then Watson and Crick came out and discovered DNA, and they're like, oh, this is everything. And it just, all that work, all that, like literally just like hundreds of years of scientific endeavor and rigorous study and experiment just thrown out the window. It was just like, oh, this is DNA, this is the code, that's everything. And I mean, yes, it's a very, very important part. It's central to a lot of things. However, there are other things and processes that can go wrong. You have, some sort of, like headquarters of of some sort of, empire or something like that. And you have like, Washington, DC in America, Canberra here, that's the epicenter. That's that's the nucleus of that country. Right. And that's where all these decisions are made and all these sorts of things, and things can go very, very wrong. And they try to make things worse every day. But, you have something out in Florida, just going crazy, like that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what's going on in Washington. And so you have to be able to understand that there are things that are going out and that can have a very serious impact on the rest of the system that doesn't just come from the nucleus. And mitochondria, first of all, have DNA as well. So we've forgotten that fact. And also forgotten the fact that mitochondria are the, sort of the executioners of apoptosis, that when there's a signal for a cell to die, mitochondria carry that out, and you have damaged mitochondria that doesn't go anywhere. So that signal to apoptose stops right there. The mitochondria also regulate cell division. And so when you have damaged mitochondria that can't regulate cell division, you get unregulated cell division, which is what cancer is. You get unregulated growth. And there's more from there that people can look into. That's very, very interesting. But it is, again, displaying that there's more disease processes that come down to the level of the mitochondria, and at least have a very significant role to play in that disease process.
Yeah, I mean, well said, Anthony, and I'm really excited to see that kind of truth come to the fore more in the scientific discussion. So thanks for explaining that. I'm mindful of your time, and I really appreciate all the wisdom that you've shared with us up till now. Just let's bring it back to the listener might be eating a quite plant heavy diet. I'm aware that we obviously have to meet people where they are. Not everyone is at the point of kind of dropping everything and going, a full lion diet, meat, salt, and water. So, I mean, it's my opinion that everyone would benefit from eating more red meat, more animal-derived foods, more organ meats. So, I mean, that's my advice to anyone listening. Please just increase a little bit and slowly work your way up, and you'll feel better, and gradually you'll feel better and better. And I would say just keep chasing that feeling, and don't stop just because you've eliminated the processed food. If you're on veggies, well, how much better can you feel? I mean, if you haven't tried, you don't know. And for some people, that means cutting everything out and doing a full carnivore. And that's something I've done to a great benefit myself at one point. And obviously, I'm eating a little bit of very small amount of fruit currently. But Anthony, what would you say? I mean, give us some advice to close this out to an average person or someone who's curious. about your type of approach.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, people don't understand just how much better they can feel if they try this, and so just giving it a fair go. Just try it, like, for 30 days. Just give it a shot and just see how you feel and see the benefits. You will feel dramatically different if you're eating more meat and you're certainly eating enough fat, and you eliminate out these other things. You're going to have proper nutrition for the first time in your life. And you're also going to eliminate out all of these defense chemicals that are making a much bigger impact in your life than you would ever imagine. Most people say, well, I already feel good. I feel pretty good. I don't have a major medical issue that I need to address by doing this big overhaul. And my response to them is like, you don't actually know how bad you feel. You don't even realize. When I stopped eating plants, I was always eating meat. But when I stopped eating plants and then just only ate meat, I didn't feel a little better or a lot better. I felt 1,000 times better than I've ever felt in my entire life. And I look back on the rest of my life and I realize I've felt like garbage my whole life.
Yeah,
And, every single day we have this low line level of garbage that we feel. But because we've always felt that way, that's normal to us. And so that's all we have to compare it against. And so we just feel pretty garbage, pretty normal, horrible. And then, maybe we have a little bit of a dip and a little bit of a bump. And so we feel good or bad in comparison to this borderline crummy level.
yeah. It's
When you
like
get,
the fog on your glasses.
yeah,
You don't realize they're fogged up.
yeah, well, that's it. Or someone who has like has never heard and then gets a cochlear implant, goes like, whoa, what is happening here? It's a whole new level of existence. And so when you have this baseline level of garbage that you feel, all of a sudden you're bang up here and you actually feel good for the first time in your life, and you know what that feels like. Down here, which was normal, that looks awful now. And so, it's a lot of people will look at that and be like, I've never felt better in my entire life. And so I think it's worth just trying and checking it out. Everyone makes different dietary changes for different reasons, and that's fine. Sometimes it's nutritional. A lot of people go vegan for these game changer things. Again, more another piece of propaganda that's just patently false or on every level. And and then they go and I'm like, oh, okay, well that's really good for me. I'm going to do this. And actually, most people feel a lot worse. They might feel better at first because they're cutting out processed garbage. They're not going out to eat. They're making their own food. That helps. But eventually they have terrible, terrible health outcomes as a result. And but maybe they're doing it for their health. Maybe they're doing it for the environment. Maybe they're doing it for ethical reasons. Whatever they're doing, they've thought about it and they've put a lot of effort into it. And so I don't think that you should take that away from them, because this is someone who's made a major, major overhaul in their life. That is, it's not necessarily easy. Just eating whatever's around, that's easy. But saying like, no, I'm only going to do this. I'm going to do it in a very thoughtful, approach. That obviously takes a lot of effort and careful thought. Now, whether it's right or wrong is immaterial. It takes a lot of effort and thought, and so you just address it from that point. If it's purely nutritional, you can talk about the nutritional benefits, and then if you're talking about the ethical side of things, you can point out that actually you can be quite ethical and even in fact better for animals in general, to go through eat large ruminant animals through regenerative agriculture, and the same with the environment. And regenerative agriculture is just what it sounds like. It's regenerative, and it helps the health of the world and the soil, and it brings about more plant and animal life as a result of it. So there's a net benefit from that practice. And so you just sort of approach these things in those in those categories, and whatever someone's reason is for doing whatever they're doing, you just talk to them on those levels and just point out that this is beneficial for various reasons. But just from a nutritional standpoint, it's it's very clear. There's a lot of it. I have yet to actually have serious discussions with vegans and vegetarians and not have them come to the realization that yes, okay, meat is definitely the best thing that we could eat, and that plants really aren't probably that good for us. But for people that are sort of willing to just try and think about these sorts of things, I would just encourage you to just to try. and then you'll see. Give it 30 days, give it really 3 months if you can. The first 2 weeks, you'll get most of that garbage out of your system. Alcohol takes about 3 weeks. But you'll get most of this stuff out of your body in about 2 weeks, and you'll feel amazing. You'll feel better every day. And after 2 weeks, you'll feel better than you ever have in your entire life. You'll probably lose, depending on the size, your size, you'll probably lose 5 to 10 kilos in those first 2 weeks. And a lot of water will just drop off. A lot of weight will just drop off. Some of that's water weight, some of that's fat, but a lot of it will just drop off. And then after that, your body will just start transforming. You'll start shredding fat. If you're working out, you'll start stacking on muscle, and you will feel better than you've ever felt in your entire life. And if you do that for another 2 weeks in that 30 days, you're going to get 2 weeks of like, my God, I've never felt better. If you do it for a full 3 months, you will see dramatic differences in your body, through how you feel and also how you look. And so I would just encourage people at least 30 days. If you can do 3 months, and then think about it like, as like, okay, well, if this is good, and if you are feeling that, well, changing this, I'm not just going to do this as a diet because that, suggested it's temporary. This is something this is my lifestyle. This is just what I am and who I am and what I do, because I want to be as healthy as I can for as long as I can. And the healthier I am, the longer I'll have. And so think about it as a way of life, test it out, try it for a month or 3 months. And then after that, be like, okay, I'm just doing this now.
Yeah. And that's great advice. And it's something I say to patients. You have to treat yourself as your own experiment, and you have to use your own body and listen to your body and respond to what it's telling you. And something like all meat elimination diet is a great place to start, because you've cleared out everything, all the distracting factors. You can really focus on that feeling of subjective feeling of health. You will, as Anthony said, you will lose weight, you will lose adipose tissue, you'll lose water weight at the same time as building structure, and building lean muscle mass. So, the benefits are absolutely enormous. And I really would encourage people to give it a go. And beyond 3 months, you'll really start that your body is adapting to a more ketogenic form of metabolism. Your body upregulates all kinds of enzymes, specifically at the kidney, to help you retain electrolytes, sodium, magnesium more efficiently. And the ability of doing that, of going through a period of prolonged ketosis, in my opinion, is very, very important, because you've developed metabolic flexibility. It's like you had a car that could only drive forward, and now you have a car that can drive forward and back. Of course, you're going to want to do that, because sometimes you need to reverse. And that ability of being metabolically flexible and being able to flip in and out of glucose metabolism and ketogenic or fat burning metabolism is important for health. And you'll find that you can fast longer, but you can still, if you need to, eat some fruit in the middle of summer when you're on holiday, and it's not a big deal. So going through or putting your body through that adaptive phase, in my opinion, is something that all young or anyone should do. But it's got innumerable benefits. So the thing that I really want to get your opinion on, because it is a common rebuttal to long-term ketosis, which is its effect on androgen profile, so potentially testosterone, and potentially thyroid. So two key endocrine functions of the body. Some people have reported that those two facets of their endocrine system aren't functioning as optimally if they don't cyclically go back into glucose metabolism. What's your answer to that, Anthony?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would just wonder what they're doing differently than what I'm doing and what all the millions of other people who have been doing like a ketogenic diet or an Atkins diet for decades are doing, because we have not had that problem. And, there are some people that have had that issue. But the difference was not the intake of carbohydrates, because I have not had carbohydrates in, I don't know, decade. And so, and I've tested my hormone panel, my androgens. They're very good. Like my endocrinologist, he was like almost in disbelief about the whole carnivore diet thing. He's like, well, you look like you're in good shape, you look like you're very healthy, but let's check under the hood. It's not my endocrinologist, it's a friend of mine who's an endocrinologist. And so I was like, fine, let's do it. As we did a very, very deep dive into, all the different hormones, different, minerals and vitamins and everything. And he said that if you took 100,000 people off the street that were my age, that my bloods would be number one without a shadow of a doubt. And so that's when he became very interested in a carnivore diet. And now he practices that himself, and he advises that to his patients. And we, and I actually work in a functional medicine clinic with him on the weekend. So I'm a neurosurgical registrar most of the time. That's my day job and night job and weekend job. But then on some weekends that I don't have, I'm not on call, I'll work in this functional medicine practice. We have, quite a number of patients that have been on a carnivore diet now. Some of us 2-3 years, and their hormones are absolutely, meticulously regulated. We don't have these problems. We don't have, steroid binding globulin, steroid hormone binding globulin going through the roof, or sex hormone binding globulin going through the roof, and we don't have their testosterone tanking and having other sorts of issues. In fact, we find people in about sort of 3 months or so, generally people, even elderly men, will have an increase of like 30 to 40% in their testosterone. And their growth hormone, IGF-1, will all go up as well, just naturally, no hormone supplementation at all. So I don't see that. I don't see that in myself. I don't see that in my patients. And it doesn't make sense to me just intuitively, right? Because, humans don't have to eat carbohydrates. You make blood sugar, glycogen, and ketones in exacting degrees. You don't need, there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. And, how many, ethnic, native populations, indigenous populations alive right now are practicing a purely carnivore diet or a purely ketogenic diet where they have no carbohydrates. Some of these people don't eat carbohydrates at all throughout their entire life. Okay. We talked about the ravages of hypothyroidism, and especially generationally with cretinism. How is that going to work? You have everybody getting hypothyroidism because they're not eating carbohydrates. Well, every single child of that generation, that next generation, will have cretinism. They're not really going to survive too well. Like, they're not going to, and you'll see that. That's not a hidden thing that you have to pick up on a blood test. And so, the Inuit right now, the Maasai in Africa, the Nanette in Siberia, and me and everyone else doing a ketogenic diet, none of us have had these problems. None of the people in the ice ages would have had these problems. None of the people crossing, the Bering Strait and the land bridge, crossing from Asia into North America had these problems, because they would have died out if they did. And so whatever those people that were doing that were getting thyroid issues, it was not from the lack of carbohydrates, because otherwise you would see it in everyone else who has a lack of carbohydrates. And that's something like, various, international medical bodies have all said. There is no lower limit on how many carbohydrates you need to eat at all.
Yeah.
So there's something else going on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree, and I think that obviously the body has an ability to synthesize its own carbohydrates through gluconeogenesis. I mean, it also has the ability to synthesize its own cholesterol endogenously, but we still find that optimal human thriving and functioning occurs when you do add exogenous cholesterol, dietary cholesterol. Look, I personally am open to the idea that some people, for whatever reason, mitochondrial haplotype, I don't know, will benefit from some dietary carbohydrate. And I'm receptive to the idea that long periods of ketosis punctuated by carbohydrate-based refeeds in a metabolically healthy person using organic fruit or other form of least toxic plant food during summer or in a seasonally appropriate, latitude appropriate time is, I personally think that's a reasonable enough idea for certain people.
I don't have anything against it. I don't necessarily think that it's optimal, but I mean, I don't think it's going to just, destroy you. The problem with these things is that, they can, a little bit of sugar can lead to a lot of sugar very quickly.
Yeah.
And I've had to pick up the pieces from a lot of people that were told that, fruit and honey are just fine, not only fine, but you need them. and they start off with a little bit of fruit, a little bit of honey, and that turns into a lot more. And
Yeah.
then within a few months, they're just eating tons of fruit, tons of sugar, adding sugar to things. And then 6 months later, they're sick and fat, and they're just eating pizza and drinking soda on the couch again. And they realize, like, what the hell happened here?
That was the gateway drug. It was
it
the
is. It is.
So and look, let's speak honestly, because like one of the trailblazers of this whole movement, Dr. Paul Saladino, was a very strict carnivore who then has advised subsequently that he recommends people, no matter what their metabolic health status, should include fruit and honey. That is not something I agree with. I think fruit and honey should be had very, very sparingly by people who are completely metabolically healthy. I don't think it has a place in someone who has raised the waist circumference, raised blood pressure, hypertriglyceridemia, low high density lipoprotein. It's not appropriate. What's your take?
Yeah, well, I think that it's I don't think that it's a treat is what it is. It's something that, like, we can use like other drugs, like alcohol and other sorts of things. It's just like, this is something that we enjoy and we like it sometimes, but it's not necessarily good for us. And we just, have it in every now and then. It's just like, oh, okay. So, like, I would still have a drink every year or so, year and a half or something like that. Because I feel much better when I don't drink. Like I said, it takes about 3 weeks to get alcohol sort of out of your system, to you're back feeling your old awesome self. And so, I like feeling awesome all the time. And so I don't, something has to be worth 3 weeks of me not feeling my best to go out drinking once. So not a lot of things meet that criteria. But every now and then I will. So, same sort of thing with, fruit and honey or whatever. You have it as a treat, like on a birthday or something like that. Some people do that. I know, Dr. Sean Baker, like on his birthday, like he'll have like a small slice of cake or something like that. He'll have something as a treat. And then the rest of the year, he does not do anything. So it's a treat, but I don't think that, dessert is, the mainstay of optimal health. The idea of this whole metabolic, being metabolically healthy. If you're metabolically healthy, you can have some fructose, you can have some sweets. That's true. But the problem is it's the sweets, it's the carbohydrates, it's the fructose that actually cause metabolic dysfunction. And so, yes, that's like saying, it's okay to drink, water from lead pipes if you don't have lead poisoning. It's like, okay, yeah, you don't have lead poisoning for now, keep it up and you will. And so, it's, I don't, for me, it's not really worth it. If, Dr. Saladino, he was carnivore for maybe a year and a half. At the point that he was at carnivore for a year and a half, I'd been a carnivore for like 7.5 years. And all of a sudden he started having problems. He's like, it must be because of this carbohydrates. I was wrong. It's just like, buddy, look around you. There are so many other people who have been doing this so much longer than you, and they are not having the problem that you are. So what are you doing differently? Like you said, after a few months, your kidneys start upregulating genes to be able to retain electrolytes better. He was saying, I'm having problems with my electrolytes. Oh, look at this. Insulin plays a role in that, in retention of this. I need to spike my insulin so that I can help bring these things back in and preserve my electrolytes. He was getting a lot of cramps, things like that. And then he was getting thyroid dysfunction. Testosterone was sort of tanking. Well, he eats a ton of liver and he advocates its use, and he eats more organs. If you look at I'm only going by his videos where he talks about what he eats in a day. He eats more organ meat than he does like regular meat. How is that going to work? I mean, you take down a buffalo in the wild. The majority of that meat is not the internal organs. The majority of the food is coming from the skeletal muscle and fat, right? And so when you take down a buffalo for an average person, a big old adult buffalo, that's going to feed you for 2 years. How many livers does it have? Right? There's one. You're going to eat that one liver over the course of 2 years. Okay. So you have to think about these things in proportionality, but he's eating liver every day. He's eating balls every day. He's eating
I think now he's mostly eating beef patties, I believe.
Yeah.
But
ground beef, yeah. But he still eats organs, so he'll eat a lot of organs. And that's the thing. So and it almost looks like he's eating more organs than he's eating beef. You know what I mean? And And so that's the thing, that's not in proportion with the animal. And
No.
so you're getting all these things, and you talk about, how liver is very nutrient dense, and of course it is, but that is the inherent danger, is that it can be too nutrient dense. Is that the perfect balance of nutrients for us? If it is, then we should only be eating liver, right? We shouldn't be eating anything else. If it's not, if it's very dense, it's going to be out of proportion for daily consumption. And so that can be a problem. You can get hypervitaminosis A, and which is known to suppress thyroid stimulating
Thyroid
hormone from
function.
the pituitary. So
Yeah.
that can be a very clear cause of thyroid deficiency.
Yeah, I mean that's a point. I think that the reality is that most people would benefit from incorporating liver into their diet, and the
Probably.
fact
Yeah.
is that the risk of hypervitaminosis A realistically is from eating carnivore liver, polar bear liver, wolf liver, in
Mm,
large amounts,
yeah.
and grass-fed ruminant liver is such a vital food that I don't think the average person needs to fear it.
No,
Um,
no. And that's a very good point. I'm not saying this for everyone. I think that people that are especially on like a mixed diet, or coming from a mixed diet or a vegan diet, liver is probably your best friend,
yeah,
because it is nutrient dense, and you really do have a deficiency. These other sources of nutrients are deficient, and we're talking about all the nutrient blockers and disruptors that plants have, and the bioavailability and so forth. When you're eating a mixed diet, you will need a different amount of vitamins and minerals.
yeah,
And like when you're eating carbohydrates and plants and things like that, you need vitamin C measured in milligrams. Whereas
yeah,
when you're not eating carbohydrates, you need it measured in nanograms. Okay, so it's a
yeah,
million fold difference, right? So it's a
yeah,
massive, massive difference. Same goes with vitamin A, right? And so I think that this is purely supposition. I haven't met Paul. I have a lot of respect for him. This is just me sort of thinking about things, and it could be that um, when you eat a mixed diet, when you eat carbohydrates and things like that, you'll need more vitamin A as well. And so it could be that he was just eating just a bit more vitamin A, and vitamin A lasts a long time. It's fat soluble. It stores around
yeah,
for a long time. So you get sort of in these upper levels, and it's causing harm. It causes harm for a long time.
yeah,
Um, and so, he could have gotten himself into that situation and then started eating carbohydrates, and then actually raised his body's demand for vitamin A. And then all of a sudden he's actually at normal levels
mm,
for
yeah,
him.
yeah.
And so
I,
maybe
I
that's
guess
something that's happening too.
Yeah, I mean, we'll guess we'll have to ask him in person. But just to couple off the liver point, um, again for most people, and I'm really speaking to a demographic of young women. All previous my podcast, we've talked about optimizing health for pregnancy, optimizing nutrition and nutrient status for pregnancy, building that micronutrient bank up for pregnancy. If you're on a mixed diet, liver is the most important thing I think that you can eat. Don't
Mhm.
overdo it. You can eat 80 grams a week of high quality grass fed liver. You are not at risk of hypervitaminosis A. It's such an important source of fat soluble vitamins to build a healthy fetus, that a healthy baby, that it shouldn't be overlooked. And Anthony and I are really talking about the edge cases and kind of the niches of application of specific carnivore dieting. So I just wanted to make that point, not to distract
Yeah.
people and not to scare them off from what is a very, very, very important food.
Yeah. Well, I 100% agree with that. And especially people on a mixed diet. I think, that's something that's has been shown in the literature for, gosh, I mean, 100 years. Adele Davis is one of the original nutritional researchers in America, and she swore by liver.
Yeah.
Especially like in pregnancy, like you should be eating like raw liver. You should be eating like a piece of raw liver a day.
Mm.
I don't remember. Maybe I don't know how much she was suggesting, but it was that was something that she was just like, this is a really, really, really good source of nutrients.
Yeah. And
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 so yeah,
evolutionarily, sorry, Anthony, evolutionarily, the tribe would cut the liver up. No one is eating the whole liver themselves. Like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
get a piece of liver, Anthony gets a piece of liver, Anthony's brother gets a little piece of liver, Anthony's mom gets a piece of liver, I get a piece of liver. Like,
yeah. Yeah, and it
only
was important. Yeah, and everyone did. And they sort of, Saladino talks about how he was out with the Hadza, they got some kill and they had the liver, and they're like pull this out like reverentially. They're like, oh my God. And I would just take a little bite and they would pass around a little bite, a bite, a bite, a bite. It's like, wow, this is so important. Liver's so important. It's like, right. And they all
Yeah.
got little bite, and then they ate that animal for the next several days, and everyone got a bite of liver, not,
Yeah.
2 pounds of it, And so, I just think that like sort of that thinking that proportion. And again, this is for the niche of doing a carnivore diet of exclusively eating meat, not in a mixed dietary context. That, you should try to think about the proportionality of the animal that you're eating. And so, if you're eating more liver than would exist in that animal, maybe it's not going to cause so much harm, but I mean, it's something to think about anyway. If we're trying to do this as naturally as possible, there may
Yeah.
be a problem. But yeah, you're right. It's the carnivores that have a higher level of vitamin A in their livers because they're eating all these other things that have vitamin A and they're storing it up. And then another carnivore eats that carnivore and it gets even more concentrated. This is why the
Yeah.
Inuits don't eat the organs of the seals, and certainly not the polar bears. They feed those to the dogs. Seal liver, enough of that will kill you
Yeah.
because of the vitamin A. Any amount of polar bear liver will kill you because of the amount of vitamin A. And
Yeah.
so, you just gotta be aware of that. And that's why they don't eat the organs of those animals. So you don't have to eat the organs if you're doing a carnivore diet. And if you're not, some people will be nutrient deficient for whatever, like you say, so some people have like slight differences, and maybe they're processing, nutrients in slightly different ways. They might need a bit more liver. Some people have like, I've literally met all of 2 people that have been deficient in folate on a carnivore diet, doing a proper, eating enough, getting enough fat. And, they say like, oh, there's not enough folate there. My folate's fine. Most people folates are fine. These 2 people, it wasn't fine. So they started eating a bit more liver. It's fine now. So, some people, I agree, will need things slightly differently. And if whatever reason you're deficient, you should take either liver or a supplement or something like that to not be deficient.
Yeah. And the other point, which is relevant to, I guess, my listeners, which is the situation where you're more at risk of hypervitaminosis A, is not going to be overconsumption of seal or polar bear liver, but it's more likely to be consumption of retinol, synthetic vitamin A, in a supplement for pregnancy. And that is why vitamin A supplements aren't recommended in pre-pregnancy preparation or antenatally. And it's because that it's out of context with the rest of the fat-soluble vitamins. When you eat a piece of ruminant, grass-fed finished beef liver, a small amount of it, you are getting A in the context of D, in the context of K and E, with dietary cholesterol, and the possibility of hypervitaminosis A and toxicity is extremely low, if not non-existent. So I just again wanted to kind of make that point for particularly my listeners who would benefit from that. But thank you. I mean, thanks, Anthony, for clearing up these situations where people might struggle on carnivore. And again, the theme and the emphasis is you have to keep experimenting with yourself. Don't listen to anyone else's dietary story. Don't think about anyone else's blood work. You implement it as you see fit. Make the changes that you think you need to make. Monitor your progress. Monitor your metabolic markers. Monitor your hormone profile, and work through it yourself. You're the only person that matters at the end of the day. So, I mean, Anthony, like, this has been such a great discussion. I really appreciate everything you've shared with us. We haven't even gotten around to elucidating the evidence for humans as evolved carnivores. I mean, I think that's incredibly compelling. Maybe we can talk about that on another podcast. Do you have any final thoughts to share with everyone?
Oh yeah, well, it's mostly just like you say, I think this is something that people need to take in and put in the context of their own life and see what they want to do with themselves. And if it's right for them, it's right for them, and to give it a shot. And if that's something that they want to incorporate, then that's the right thing to do. I think there's a lot of different reasons to eat all sorts of different ways. for me, I really like feeling my best, and my best is a lot better than at any other stage of my life. And so I really enjoy that, and I enjoy feeling that way. And and so that's the choice that I've made. But everyone's going to be able to needs to be able to make decisions for themselves. And so I think that it's just a matter of educating people and getting this information out there, and at least getting a counter argument out than what the prevailing narrative is at the moment, which is meat is bad, fat is bad, and plants are good. That's not necessarily the case. And so just taking a look at that and just thinking about it for yourself, maybe digging a little deeper and saying, maybe there's something that I should consider here. As John Stuart Mill said, if you only know your side of the argument, then you don't know much. If you haven't heard the argument in its most compelling form, from the most worthy adversary and advocate of that argument, then you don't even know what the argument is, because you've
Yeah.
only heard a description of that argument from other people that may have gotten it wrong. They may be straw manning the argument. And so they say, well, this is what they say, and it's wrong because of this. Well, that may not
Yeah.
actually be what they say, and it may actually be right. And so listen to it from its compelling sources. I go listen to vegan guys all the time. It's, even though it's painful at this point, because they say the same thing. It's just the same thing over and over again. The hormetic one, that's a new one that's sort of come around more recently, because it's just all the other ones have been so thoroughly debunked that they really can't keep blowing that horn anymore.
Yeah.
But I want to know if I'm missing something, because I think I've got it right, but I don't want to be a victim of confirmation bias. So I will go to Dr. Greger's site. I'll go to Dean Ornish's site. I'll go to Dr. Furman's site and all the rest. And, nutritionists and biochemists and doctors, all that espouse a carnivore or a vegan diet, and say, okay, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing?
Yeah.
And I try to find out. And so, the reason that I'm able to talk to people about this, I'm able to debate with vegans about this, is because I've thoroughly gone through both sides of the argument. And so I'm very well aware of that. And that's why I've made the decision that I have. But that's
Yeah.
something that everyone should do, and at least give it a thought, and just take a look and see what people are saying, and then make the decision that's right for you.
Yeah. I mean, that's great advice. I couldn't agree more. So thanks so much, Anthony. I mean, yeah, you're a font of knowledge, and yeah, I really appreciate all your everything you said and shared with the listeners. So where can people follow you and let them know where you're at on social media, and if they want to find out more or listen to more of your content?
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you. Um, my thing. I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD, and I have an Instagram page by the same name, Anthony Chaffee, MD, and then my podcast is called The Plant Free MD. Just sort of on that basis of that's how I sort of got the start. Is just I just cut out plants, and those are my main channels. I'm also on Rumble and things like that. People use that platform as well, but those are sort of the main things. And then I have some other social media things, like Twitter and God forbid TikTok, that horrible thing, and where I put those on. But those are the main ones, and all the other stuff can be found through my Instagram. Yeah, and Twitter is just Anthony_Chaffee. So yeah, those are the
Great.
main ones.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. Thanks so much. And yeah, well, maybe we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Cheers.